Great. This is, again, Little House in the Big Woods, Chapter 3, The Long Rifle. Every evening before he began to tell stories, Pa made the bullets for his next day's hunting. Laura and Mary helped him. They brought the big, long-handled spoon and the box full of bits of lead and the bullet mold. Then, while he squatted on the hearth and made the bullets, they sat one on each side of him and watched. First, he melted the bits of lead in the big spoon, held in the coals. When the lead was melted, he poured it carefully from the spoon into the little hole in the bullet mold. He waited a minute, then he opened the mold, and out dropped a bright new bullet onto the hearth. The bullet was too hot to touch, but it shone so temptingly that sometimes Laura or Mary could not help touching it. Then they burned their fingers, but they did not say anything because Pa had told them never to touch a new bullet. If they burned their fingers, that was their own fault. They should have minded him. So they put their fingers in their mouths to cool them and watched Pa make more bullets. Isn't that funny? There would be a shining pile of them on the hearth before Pa stopped. He let them cool, then with his jackknife, he trimmed off the little lumps left by the hole in the mold. He gathered up the tiny shavings of lead and saved them carefully to melt again the next time he made bullets. The finished bullets he put into his bullet pouch. This was a little bag which Ma had made beautifully of buckskin. From a buck Pa had shot. Do you know what a buck is? It's a male deer. After the bullets were made, Pa would take his gun down from the wall and clean it. Out in the snowy woods all day, it might have gathered a little dampness, and the inside of the barrel was sure to be dirty from powder smoke. So Pa would take the ramrod from its place under the gun barrel and fasten a piece of clean cloth on its end. He stood the butt of the gun in a pan on the hearth and poured boiling water from the tea kettle into the gun barrel. Then, quickly, he dropped the ramrod in and rubbed it up and down, while the hot water blackened with powder smoke spurted through the little hole in which the cap was placed when the gun was loaded. Pa kept pouring in more water and washing the gun barrel with the cloth on the ramrod until the water came out clear. Then the gun was clean. The water must always be boiling so that the heated steel would dry instantly. Then Pa put a clean, greased rag on the ramrod, and while the gun barrel was still hot, he greased it well on the inside. With another clean, greased cloth, he rubbed it all over, outside, every bit of it, until it was oiled and sleek. After that, he rubbed and polished the gun stock until the wood of it was bright and shining too. Now he was ready to load the gun again, and Laura and Mary must help him. Standing tall and straight, holding the long gun upright on its butt, while Laura and Mary stood on either side of him, Pa said, "You watch me now and tell me if I make a mistake." So they watched him very carefully, but he never made a mistake. Laura handed him the smooth, polished cow horn full of powder. The top of the horn was a little metal cap. Pa filled the cap full of the gunpowder and poured the powder down the barrel of the gun. Here they are, helping him load the gun. He seems like he has a good sense of humor, doesn't he? Just says little things to them. Then he shook the gun a little and tapped the barrel to be sure that all the powder was together in the bottom. "Where's my patch box?" he asked then, and Mary gave the little tin box full of little pieces he greased of greased cloth. Pa laid one of these bits of greasy cloth over the muzzle of the gun, put one of the shiny new bullets on it, and with the ramrod he pushed the bullet and the cloth down the gun barrel. Then he pounded them tightly against the powder. When he hit them with the ramrod bounced up in the gun barrel, and Pa caught it and thrust it down again. He did this for a long time. So here's some of the equipment he uses when he's making the bullets. The kettle for hot water. You can see the pouch, you can see the little bullets on the table and the pouch full of bullets. I'm not sure what everything else would be. He did this for a long time. Next, he put the ramrod back in its place against the gun barrel. Then, taking a box of caps from his pocket, he raised the hammer of the gun and slipped one of the little bright caps over the hollow pin that was under the hammer. He let the hammer down slowly and carefully. If it came down quickly, bang, the gun would go off. Now the gun was loaded, and Pa laid it on its hooks over the door. When Pa was at home, the gun always lay across the wooden hooks above the door. Pa had whittled the hooks out of a green stick with his knife and had driven their straight ends deep into holes in the log. The hooked ends curved upward and held the gun securely. The gun was always loaded and always above the door so that Pa could get it quickly and easily anytime he needed a gun. When Pa went into the big woods, he always made sure that the bullet pouch was full of bullets and that the tin patch box and the box of caps were with it in his pockets. The powder horn and a small sharp hatchet hung at his belt, and he carried the gun ready loaded on his shoulder. He always reloaded the gun as soon as he had fired it, for he said he did not want to meet trouble with an empty gun. Whenever he shot at a wild animal, he had to stop and load the gun, measure the powder, put it in, and shake it down, put in the patch and the bullet, and pound them down. Then put a fresh cap under the hammer before he could shoot again. When he shot at a bear or a panther, he must kill it with the first shot. A wounded bear or panther could kill a man before he had time to load his gun again. It was very dangerous. But Laura and Mary were never afraid when Pa went alone into the big woods. They knew he would always kill bears and panthers with the first shot. After the bullets were made and the gun was loaded, came storytelling time. "Tell us about the voice in the big woods," Laura would beg him. Pa crinkled up his eyes at her. "Oh no," he said. "You don't want to hear about the time I was a naughty little boy." "Oh yes, we do, Laura and Mary said. So Pa began. The story of Pa and the voice in the woods. When I was a little boy, not much bigger than Mary, I had to go every afternoon to find the cows in the woods and drive them home. My father told me never to play by the way, but to hurry and bring the cows home before dark, because there were bears and wolves and panthers in the woods. One day I started earlier than usual, so I thought I did not need to hurry. There were so many things to see in the woods that I forgot that dark was coming. There were red squirrels in the trees, chipmunks scurrying through the leaves, and little rabbits playing games together in the open places. Little rabbits, always have games together before they go to bed. Sounds like you. I began to play that I was a mighty hunter, stalking the wild animals and the Indians. I played I was fighting the Indians until the woods seemed full of wild men, and then all at once I heard the birds twittering good night. It was dusky in the path and dark in the woods. I knew that I must get the cows home quickly, or it would be black night before they were safe in the barn, and I couldn't find the cows. I listened, but I could not hear their bells. I called, but the cows didn't come. I was afraid of the dark and the wild beasts, but I dared not go home to my father without the cows. So I ran through the woods, hunting and calling. All the time the shadows were getting thicker and darker, and the woods seemed larger, and the trees and the bushes looked strange. You understand what's happening? Mm-hmm. Lost track of what he was supposed to do first and foremost, right? Mm-hmm. I could not find the cows anywhere. I climbed up hills looking for them and calling, and I went down into the dark ravines, calling and looking. I stopped and listened for the cowbells, and there was not a sound but the rustling of leaves. Do you know what a ravine is? A ravine is like a small valley, a dip in the earth. I don't know, sometimes you get thick brush growing in there, and so it's like a steep path down. We don't really have them here in Houston, so I'm not surprised you don't know them. Then I heard loud breathing and thought a panther was there in the dark behind me, but it was only my own breathing. My bare legs were scratched by the briars, and when I ran through the bushes, their branches struck me. But I kept on, looking and calling. "Suki, Suki, Suki, Suki," I shouted with all my might. "Suki!" Right over my head, something asked, "Who?" My hair stood straight on end. "Who? Who?" the voice said again. And then, how I did run. I forgot all about the cows. All I wanted was to get out of the dark woods, to get home. That thing in the dark came after me, and it called again, "Who? Who?"
What?
Can I watch it?
No, we don't need to watch.
I ran with
right
all
now.
my might. Larkin. I ran till I couldn't breathe, and I still kept on running. Something grabbed my foot, and down I went. Up I jumped, and then I ran. Not even a wolf could have caught me. At last I came out of the dark woods, by the barn. There stood all the cows, waiting to be let through the bars. I let them in, and then ran to the house. The cows had gone back to the spot on their own, and maybe his dad helped. My father looked up and said, "Young man, what makes you so late? Been playing by the way?" I looked down at my feet, and then I saw that one big toenail had been torn clean off. Here he is running through the woods. I had been so scared that I had not felt it hurt until that minute. Pa always stopped telling the story here and waited until Laura said, "Go on, Pa, please go on." "Well," Pa said, "then your grandpa went out into the yard and cut a stout switch, and he came back into the house and gave me a good thrashing, so that I would remember to mind him after that." Do you know what the switch and the thrashing are? The switch is like a long stick, and the thrashing is a spanking with the stick on his bottom, probably. So that was more common 100 years ago, and this is 150 years ago. "A big boy 9 years old is old enough to remember to mind," he said. "There's a good reason for what I tell you to do," he said, "and if you'll do as you're told, no harm will come to you." "Yes, yes, Pa," Laura would say, bouncing up and down on Pa's knee. "And then what did he say?" "He said, if you'd obeyed me, as you should, you wouldn't have been out in the big woods after dark, and you wouldn't have been scared by a screech owl." So the kids really like that story because they've got Pa, who's very serious and has a hard life caring for them, and he spends a lot of time getting his ammunition, the bullets, and all the hunting he does, and he has a little bit of time in the evenings to just be relaxed and tell the girls a story. And so they're so thankful to have that time with him because they don't get a lot of time with him during the day. It's so hard to make ends meet. So that's one thing that comes to mind from the story. What do you notice from the story?
That, well, that the...
I should have asked you first.
Wait, from the chapter or the
From the
story?
From the chapter. Let's think about the chapter.
Okay.
What
How
about
how Laura and
Mary?
Mary
Mhm.
both liked the story.
Yeah, they both get very excited to hear the stories at night. What did they start? How did the chapter start? Do you remember? She's describing the way he would make the bullets by melting the metal. He'd pour it into a mold.
And they touch it.
He'd make it a ball, and then as that metal would cool, it'd make a hard ball. But yes, sometimes it'd be too hot and they'd touch it. But I've seen people do that before. If you go to kind of one of the places where they reenact how things were for individuals on the frontier and in westward expansion, more than 150 years ago, probably about that. They'll reenact the makings of these round bullets that they would put in a gun, and they'll kind of show you how you do it. He rubs everything down with oil. Do you know why he rubs all the metal down with oil?
So he can get a better grip on it?
So the bullets can go through it smoothly, and also so it doesn't rust. I think because he has to take care of that gun. He has to take care of it very carefully. The other thing that comes to mind with me as she's remembering all this detail is she's paying attention to all this stuff that's going on in her life, and it's stuff that she probably didn't. So she's writing this when she's an adult, much older. In fact, it says the first sentence, I think, of the very first chapter was 60 years ago. So she's starting to write these stories when she's 60 years old, but she's remembering all this detail. So all the stuff you're seeing every day in your life is probably getting planted in your memories somewhere. Memories of things that I do every day, probably things that I do well, things that I don't do well, and maybe someday you'll write about it too. But all these the detail that she has, the detail with which she's able to recall the manufacturing of the bullets that he did, I think it shows she's watching him, she's paying attention to him. She obviously has a very close relationship with her pa, with her dad, and it also, again, tells us a lot about, in a sense, it's a fantastic diary that tells us about life on the prairie. Well, here it was life in the big woods, but eventually after this book, we're going to switch to Little House on the Prairie, which is what they named the TV show after, and the stories get even better after that. So, well, that was a lot of discussion for chapter 3. So we'll see everyone next time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to turn it off, Cassie?